Before our show today, we have a quick announcement. We are just launching our new cohort for our Next Economy MBA. What's that? Why should someone take this course? What's the benefit? This 9-month course provides a holistic framework to develop your understanding and literacy in practical elements of engaging in the next economy that you won't find anywhere else. There are limited seats available. Take advantage of our early bird discount and sign up to claim your seat. To learn more, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA and sign up today. Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm your host, Andrew Baskin. The goal of this interview series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. In this episode of Next Economy Now, Kevin Bayuk, a partner at Lift Economy, interviews Penny Livingston-Stark. Penny is internationally recognized as a prominent permaculture teacher, designer, and speaker. She holds a master's in Eco-Social Regeneration and 3 diplomas in permaculture design. She taught with, hosted, and studied directly from Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, the co-founders of Permaculture and the developers of the Permaculture Design Certification Course curriculum. Penny's been teaching internationally and working professionally in the land management, regenerative design, and permaculture development field for 25 years and has extensive experience in all phases of ecologically sound design and construction, as well as the use of natural, non-toxic building materials. She specializes in site planning and the design of resource-rich landscapes, integrating rainwater collection, edible and medicinal planting, spring development, pond and water systems, habitat development, and watershed restoration for homes, co-housing communities, businesses, and diverse yield perennial farms. A huge influence on Lift Economy's co-founder, Kevin Bayuk, we are honored to have her on the show. So without further ado, please enjoy Kevin Bayuk's conversation with Penny Livingston-Stark.
I'm excited today because I have the privilege and honor of interviewing Penny Livingston-Stark. Penny is one of my greatest teachers and sources of inspiration for the work that I do at Lift Economy and working to create and grow the next economy. And today's interview will also be kind of kicking off a series that I'm excited about within Next Economy Now, looking at how eco-literacy informs all of our work, a story that I don't often get to tell. Thank you, Penny, for making space and time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely my pleasure. And I wanted to start with the term permaculture. I use it sometimes in my work, and I sometimes get people who seem to recognize it a little bit, and sometimes I get a confused look. And I generally in discourse kind of with folks find out that they've heard of permaculture but don't quite understand it maybe in the way that you and I do. I'm wondering if you could share kind of your understanding of permaculture and maybe how it intertwines into your story.
Great. So a lot of people get permaculture confused where they think that it's really about gardening tips or agriculture or something like that, but it's not. It's much bigger and deeper than that. It's a design system, a design science that's rooted in observing natural ecosystems. It's based in solutions of how can we as humans provide for our needs and our supply lines in ways that give back more than what we take from the earth. So we've gathered inspiration, knowledge, information from all kinds of wisdom traditions and people who have developed particular ecological design solutions. And we look at those and see how we can apply them in our lives. So this includes principles that are based in nature that would include things like how we grow our food and our agriculture, but it also includes energy, shelter, land use, ecosystems, and of course, economy is a key component to this design system in our considerations because you can't have a healthy agriculture or a healthy ecosystem if you don't have a healthy based economy. So I find this was one of actually the topic that brought me to permaculture. I didn't know anything about what it was, but interestingly, it was about local economy when someone was explaining it to me was what drew me to take a permaculture design certification training.
Was that training was it with Tom Ward or with Bill Mollison or both? Or I can't remember the first training that you did.
Well, the first course I took was with Tom Ward, Jude Hobbs, and Rick Valley up in Lost Valley Education Center in about 1990. And then around 92 or so, I took a course with Bill Mollison. And then when he came to California, they contacted me and asked me to host him for a conference here. And I did, and we became fast friends. And so I got to spend a lot of time with Bill. He's one of my main mentors and sources of inspiration. And he was really almost like an uncle to me. You know, he stayed with me a lot when he came to the States.
And is that when in that kind of timeline did you were the founder, of course, of the Permaculture Institute of Northern California, and then later the Regenerative Design Institute, and just on that timeline, can you share kind of how those things came together?
Well, I took my first permaculture design course in 1990, like I said, and then I think it was around 92, I took a teacher training and a course with Bill Mollison, and I became sort of a permaculture junkie, and I just wanted to learn everything about it. So throughout the 90s, I would focus, maybe I would take a year focusing on how to clean water biologically. And I'd take another year or two or more on how to build with non-toxic building materials like clay and straw and stone and natural building systems like cod, basically building houses out of earth balls. I was so blown away that you can actually build a house that way. My background was in landscape design, and I did a lot of work with native plants and organic landscaping prior to learning about permaculture. And I was also a textile artist, and those were my skills. And of course, I was growing my own food and had a truck farm for a while also before I learned about permaculture. So my skills were a lot based on the kind of land-based, working with soil and water and plants. But I was also an entrepreneur and ran my own businesses, a number of different ones. And so, so to keep it on the topic of economy, I've been intrigued to how to make these sustainable systems sustainable, economically.
Yeah, viable.
And one of the early inspirations for me was Paul Hawken when he wrote Ecology of Commerce. That was happening at the time, and natural capitalism was coming out of the Rocky Mountain Institute with Amory and Hunter Lovins. And those were big inspirations for me, as was John Todd, who developed living machines. Anna Edie, who does her little homestead sort of you're in charge, using her urine for fertilizer, as well as worm, taking garbage disposal, or garburators as they say in Canada, and turning that into worm compost, grinding up all her veggies. I just got really kind of geeking out on all of these different people and mentors. And so I did a lot of my own experimenting.
Right.
Yeah. Because back then there wasn't really places to look to see how does this work? What is permaculture? What does it look like? How does it really work? We were kind of inventing it as we went along.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of innovation and trialing on kind of home scale and then community scale, different systems designs. And then at some point you formed the institute, the Pink started the Permaculture Institute in Northern California. I'm just curious if Pink was in Point Reyes or Skywater, or where it started.
Pink was was in Point Reyes Station, and it was a third of an acre garden and homestead that we put in. But we started Permaculture Institute of Northern California so we could hire teachers to come teach, not only me, but the community, how to build with earth, or how to make composting toilets, or, we ran a series of workshops just out of our home for the local community. And we did that for probably 5 or 6 years. And then when it was time to really turn it into more of a nonprofit, we turned it into Regenerative Design Institute, partly because at that point I was starting to work more internationally. So I didn't want our organization to just be limited to Northern California. Wanted to go for the world. So Regenerative Design Institute, and we thought the word regenerative was a word that really described permaculture, because permaculture isn't about being less bad. It's about actually being a benefit to the earth and to the ecosystem and to the community, and to be able to give back more than what we take, because we've been working on a deficit. So this is all rooted in permaculture principles. And for people who are interested in learning more about permaculture, I suggest they take a permaculture design course, because it's really hard to go into it in an hour or even a day.
Right.
It's very complex.
Yeah, there's a lot of content and relearning and kind of challenging some of the assumptions of the prevailing culture with how we think about our needs and the strategies that are even possible. I think that's one of the things that when people get introduced to permaculture that I find is they actually just become astonished, like you were mentioning, even building, that you could take sand, straw, and clay, and in the right combinations create a shelter with your friends that can comfortably house you and be a healthy building.
Right.
It's an amazing thing. And you've done also...
Yeah, be energy efficient.
Right. And you've tried on a lot of these systems, not only in the abstract in terms of study, and you've done all these things. Do you want to share some examples of some of the work that you've done at different scales that just stand out that to you as good showcase examples of where permaculture design it kind of maybe either intersects with the economy or with people's needs in ways that might be surprising to people?
Okay. Well, how much time do you have? Well, to start with, the system of digging a pond to create habitat, and in this case it was so our ducks could have a pool party in between eating bugs in the garden. We dug a pond, and with the subsoil from the pond, we built an office for myself, 120 round feet office that was integrated. So the roof water from the office would go into the pond, and the ducks would interact with the pond. And then in order to keep the pond topped up, I was inspired by John Todd on how to build gray water systems through his living machine technology. And I thought I knew some of his people who were working with him, some ecological engineers. And I said to them, well, because John's water cleaning systems would go from one tank to another, which he called cells. And I thought, well, does it have to go from tank to tank? Can't you build just sort of a natural marsh system? And they said, sure. So I built what is now known as a constructed wetland without ever having heard of one. And it processed the gray water from my laundry and bath, shower. And it worked fantastic. And I learned a lot. And there's a whole story there about how the ducks wouldn't go in there initially until the biology kicked in, because of the pills and the soaps were breaking down the oils in under their feathers. But then when the ducks started going to the pond, I knew that the surfactants and the soaps were being taken out and that the system was really working well. So the ducks were what we call an indicator species to show that the gray water system truly was working. So that model of digging a pond and taking the soil from the pond and building a structure was created in our garden that was formerly the location of Permaculture Institute of Northern California. And I hired teachers to come and teach us how to build. So we built the first cob building in California with my mentor, Yanto Evans, and Michael Smith, who was helping them get organized. with the Cobb Cottage Company up in Oregon. And Yanto built the first Cobb building in the United States up in Oregon. The Welsh technology, Cobb is a Welsh word, and Yanto was a Welsh man and brought that technology from his home. Anyway, I'm really into lineages. It's a big piece. And then I also started applying permaculture to landscaping and site planning. And I've worked on, with co-housing companies and looking at roof water integration and habitat and food production on that scale of community, like co-housing communities. Yeah. And then also, we had 200 acres that did a big restoration project where we did some earthworks, actually with Bill Mollison's bulldozer operator. He came from Australia, master bulldozer pond builder guy, and we took him up to this land up in Trinity County and worked with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to get some funding and put in some catch basins that were actually protecting the land from erosion control. Because we would get, in a wet, extreme winter, we might get 10 feet of rain in an extreme situation up in that territory. And so we had to design for that. And we did, and to this day, that was 25 years ago or so, maybe not quite 23 years ago. And it's holding up great. And we have 450,000 gallons worth of water storage at the very top of the land. And anyway, so I've done, large scale restoration projects from that.
Those are perfect examples of, and like when I think about them, it's I think for listeners who are maybe there is something surprising about how through integrated systems design, you could look at kind of local self-reliance at different scales. So even on a home garden scale, you could turn the problem of pest control into duck eggs and the problem of housing that they're providing the ducks with habitat into a healthy building that's not requiring clear-cut forests somewhere else and stick frames, but actually using the materials on site and actually creating community and learning and, of course, supporting the food that's being grown there and the water, being caught off the rooftop in a dry climate rather than being piped and delivered through some type of mains water system, which requires lots of infrastructure and cost and maintenance. And so this idea of decentralization and then up to co-housing scales and then ecosystem restoration scales, where you still are talking about decentralized systems. I think those connections, there's examples there of work that you've done, but they actually, almost like in a fractal, you could just keep on increasing the scale, and one could all of a sudden imagine that what if, or I asked the question, what if all of culture were oriented this way towards finding ways to create solutions to our needs in ways that actually are healing and regenerative or restorative?
I talked to a state senator at one point, and I was kind of the elevator speech because I wanted to know what was permaculture. And I just said, every person who's in the lawmaking field should take a permaculture training, because people that do take these trainings come out and really, even after a 72-hour bare bones training, they come out so far along the ecoliteracy path compared to the people that are making the decisions in the government, that my goal would be to see, even we could cherry pick and, given the essentials around permaculture principles and how to apply it to governance and to economy and to land use and planning. I think it's an incredible tool, and the fact that it's still somewhat marginalized to this day is kind of shocking. Because I think also looking at the economy, one of the issues that is huge that's kind of hamstringing us from developing these more regenerative, life-supporting systems is the economic stranglehold that a lot of international corporations have on us. And let's just call it, it's like the elephant in the room. There's a lot of reasons why, past corporations trying to keep us from being able to supply for our needs within our local community, because it's kind of will start to create an obsolete situation for a lot of international corporations if we can buy our food from our local farmers market or our local farmers, or grow our own instead of from, any unnamed food corporation.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which there are many. And so Bill Mollison, to quote him, one of the things he said that really spoke to my heart was the quickest way to impoverish a community is to ship all its resources out. And that just makes so much sense, because I think of the economy, the way I understand it is like water. I think about a watershed as economic system. So if you hoard all the water and you dam up all the rivers and streams and hoard the water, it's going to impoverish the whole ecosystem, the whole watershed. And that's not going to be to the benefit of you or anybody else. If you've got all the water, but everything around you is a desert and, desiccated, that's not going to increase your quality of life. And I think the economy, the economic system where there's people now, CEOs that they say have like 500 or 600 times more money than their workers make, or it used to be like 20 times more, and now it's like 500 or 600 times more. That's not improving their quality of life either. If they're looking around and everybody, their neighbors and everybody around them are struggling in their community, that, I don't know when people are going to understand that what we do to each other, we do to ourselves, just like what Chief Seattle said, what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. And so learning reciprocity, I think, is a big piece of the economy. Charles Eisenstein wrote that book on sacred economics and the gift economy, which isn't about taking. It's actually more about giving and sharing than it is about getting something for free.
Yeah.
And even looking at the word economy, the word comes from oikos, which means home, and nami comes from the Greek namia, which means management or law. So the word economy is really about how we manage our home and what are the rules of law in our home. And how it got into, just being about monetary value is a co-opting of the word itself. So I'm a little bit of a deconstructionist. So
sure.
How often when I get confused about something or something that's so huge I can't understand it, I'll start peeling away the layers of the onion and try to get to the source.
Mm-hmm.
And even the word radical, because this might be a very radical idea, that means stemming from the center. It means stemming from the root. Yeah. And that's how somehow turned into this, like, oh, we're so out there, we're so radical.
On the edge.
Well, actually, no, we're actually stemming from our core, from our center.
Right.
Is where we're coming from.
And so, let me ask an unfair question, because obviously nobody has the answer, but what do we do? How do we, we're in this mess where there's, hundreds of millions of people who are malnourished and hungry tomorrow or today. And we're looking at the existential crisis of our humanity with climate change. Just curious to hear your free associated thoughts of, what do we do from here?
Well, it's an interesting question, because another thing, to quote my great mentor, Bill Mollison, he said, it's not about one or two people doing magnanimous things. It's about millions of people doing small things, and even the simple thing that if everybody could start becoming ecologically literate in their own home, they could, for example, learning where your water comes from. When you throw something away, where's that away? What's downstream from you? What are you downstream from? Understanding where's your food come from. People want to look at their connection to the earth, look on their plate. What are they eating? Do you even know what's in your food? Can you pronounce it? The ingredients? And knowing the integration of what we put in our bodies, what comes from the earth, is what we put in our bodies. And as I'm aging, I'll tell you what, you want to look after your body. If your body isn't healthy, life is really not fun. And so it's in our own special self-interest to also look after our home, to keep our bodies healthy, because aging will come. If you're lucky, you will get old. And it's not for the faint of heart, I've learned. You know, you've got to really, that's when the chickens come home to roost, as they say. You know, you've got to, it's how you've been living your life and what you've been putting in your body is what's going to start, you'll start seeing those effects as you get older. So, as we're entering into the booming baby boomer aging time, health has become a real fad. You know, people are getting, also when people get scared enough, they'll change. But our ideal would be for people to change because it's ethics, because it's the right thing to do, not because they're terrified of the alternative. You know, we teach a lot about trying to source from love and creativity as opposed from fear and hate and scarcity, to source more from creativity, love, abundance. And just when you look at nature, here's another spin on permaculture and the economy. There's a lot of permaculture people have a real thing about, I call it the P word, profit. And like capitalism and profit. And there's a difference between it being obscene profit, like I was mentioning, 600 times more CEOs are making than their workers, and making it off the backs of the workers. That's the kind of capitalism that people have an abhorrent rejection to, even though we all participate in it. But the other part of profit, if you look at natural systems, is nature works on profit. You could change the word profit to abundance. You could take or surplus. But nature in a natural ecosystem provides surplus that can then be given back to the ecosystem. And without that profit or without that surplus, nature couldn't function in the way that she does.
I always found that fascinating that nature left to herself in most environments will build topsoil and increase fertility just
exactly
on her own, which is an amazing thing to hold in awareness that nature is giving back to itself.
And farmers do that. Like good now, it's coming from California, where it's kind of epicenter of organic farming. A good organic farmer, or biodynamic farmers particularly, will be building soil over time. So as they're producing food every year, their soil gets better and better and better. And the conventional agriculture people look to them and go, wow, you know, while their inputs are going up, the organic farmers' inputs are essentially going down. And largely because they're not so mechanized, it's not like organic farmers are laughing their way to the banks, but a well-managed farm is profitable, you know. And a good farmer has to have a good sense of economy. But when you start subtracting, this is another piece in the permaculture principles that I find fascinating, is looking at the embedded or embodied energy, or what some people call externalities, that go into any product. So, for example, if we're looking at food, looking at, if you walk out your door and you pick it in your garden and you're building soil in the process, you have a net energy gain there, which would be a net economic gain if you're counting in full cost accounting economics, as opposed to a tomato that's been shipped all over from 2,000, 3,000 miles, say from Mexico, on farms that have been displaced, the cooperatives or ejidos, and that tomato is pumped up full of chemicals and it's shipped in refrigerated trucks throughout the United States with ozone depleting CFC cooling equipment from boxes that was manufactured up in Clay Pot Sound in Canada, taking actually old growth to make cardboard boxes. This is a true story. and this tomato arrives on your plate, weary and watery and tasteless. And look at all the energy that I just mentioned a few aspects, but you could go down any number of rabbit holes just to calculate the amount of energy that goes into that tomato. So one of the things that I love about permaculture is they look at that. They look at the embodied or embedded energy in a product or service as one of their calculations, or I should say one of our calculations on how we make our decisions. So whether we're buying building materials or food or computers, CDs, I mean, we're not saying, okay, we're Luddites, we're never going to use any of these technologies. It's not about that. It's just about keep turning the lights on and not being in denial about where these things are coming from. So we're not necessarily saying never buy a CD or don't get a phone or don't use technology. I don't think if the literate people went into their own little holes and did their own thing and had their own special moment, I don't think that's going to serve the world. I think it's important to use technology, but just know where your technology is coming from, and just be aware.
To hold it in awareness.
Yeah. And then you know what the impact is when you go buy an iPhone or a whatever phone or a laptop. But because it does have destructive, I don't actually know the answer, to be honest, about whether there's a net energy gain at the end of the day from using a computer or not. I suppose it depends on what you do with it.
Right.
But yeah, that's a question though that we should ask.
This idea of awareness, I think, is one of the things that I really admire about your work. When I first learned about permaculture from you and was learning about the ethics and the principles and all the techniques and strategies which were inspiring and thinking about them at bigger levels, it was kind of around that time that you actually created a program where you took the Regenerative Design Institute and some of the permaculture work, and you kind of married it with a focus on nature awareness. I'm wondering if you could, I wonder if you could just tell the listeners about how that happened and why that was important to you.
Well, I met some students of Tom Brown, who wrote The Tracker, and John Young, who was Tom Brown's kind of main apprentice. And they got interested in permaculture because it is, kind of goes, once you get connected to nature, we're all going to eat food, and live in shelters and drive cars and do whatever. How do we start living in a more harmonious fashion? So that became of interest to the nature awareness people. And they brought to me the whole notion of bird language, which is really like listening to the intelligence of birds, because one of their functions is they tell the story of what's going on in the forest. So it helps us understand more deeply what's happening out there if we learn how to understand the language of the birds. And I started learning bird language, and boy, did that change my life. Because I don't know what people think about animals and birds. If you go back to Descartes, who sort of, because of his thinking, got adopted in Western thinking that, animals don't have souls, or, like, what do they think? These birds are like random objects, just like hurling themselves through space with no sense of intention. Like, there's this incredible deep intelligence in nature that the birds tell the stories of. And so that really opened my eyes. And I decided that I think some of the best permaculturists would be people who understand that level of nature connection through understanding bird language and tracking and knowing our non-human neighbors. So it's part of my journey was getting to know our non-human neighbors who are our plants. And I consider all of creation to be sentient beings. That's you might call it my belief system, or it's been my experience as well. So the book, which I like. because they help manage land. We can learn more about how animals, if run correctly, can be a benefit to the ecosystem. I grew up in dairy country, like there's a whole sort of cowspiracy thinking of cows being really bad for the earth. And yes, the way that they're being managed in feedlots, that is very true. But if learning how to mimic the wild herds, they are actually sequestering atmospheric CO2 through proper grazing, where actually grazing cows properly on grasslands can actually sequester atmospheric CO2 and put it back into the ground through the roots of the plants in huge amounts. So there's been studies, there's science behind this around carbon farming. And, so a good dairy farmer might consider themselves to be a grass farmer because they're finding out that grasses actually sequester atmospheric carbon in some ways even on a more permanent basis than forests. So there's been this kind of assumption that anything, if you eat meat or dairy and you support the cattle industry, you're bad or you're living a very unregenerative life. And depending on where you buy your meat or your dairy, that could be true. But it's also not always true because there are now ranches that are running their cattle in ways that are restoring the grasslands and the meadows. They're replacing, like in the territory where I grew up in West Marin, there used to be 300,000 elk that would come through the land there.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what that kind of disturbance would be. And they all got assassinated and fled to the north when the settlers came. And so the cows have kind of replaced them. And it went through a time of really land degradation over, a few decades of bad land management. And now the ranchers there have learned ways to start regenerating the land. And I've lived in that area for over 60 years, and I've watched the land restore itself and erosion patterns go away because of proper land management that the ranchers have learned in the last probably 15, 20 years. And so just to say, you can't point to a thing and say, oh, this is bad, or this is causing the problem. The whole thing is very systemic. And I think that example just illustrates how education and ecoliteracy can restore a whole ecosystem, especially if you're a rancher that controls 2,000 or 3,000 acres or whatever of land, anywhere between 300 and 6,000 acres. A lot of these ranchers are managing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is that a lot of these conservative ranchers have a much more profoundly positive land ethic than even a lot of environmentalists I know. I'm saying something really controversial, but there's a lot of really knee-jerk environmentalists that don't understand ecosystems, but they love the earth and they want to preserve the wildlands. But then what stresses are we putting on agriculture? There's a huge chasm between environmentalism and agriculture. And part of what the work I've been doing is trying to bridge that gap so that when you have agriculture that is more permaculturally oriented, like this kind of high intensity grazing system I was just talking about, mimicking the wild herds and moving animals around more frequently on the land and not giving them antibiotics or hormones and allowing the deep-rooted grasses to grow back. There's a lot of caveats on how to do this, but when it's done properly, you're actually sequestering atmospheric carbon and reducing the capacity for climate change.
It's a great example. So this taking nature awareness and increasing our eco-literacy to also consider externalities and embodied energy, and just this greater whole perspective would actually inform actual techniques and strategies on the ground of a whole a whole various sorts, whether it's ranching practices, building practices, even transportation, energy, all sorts of different aspects of the economy. If we have this awareness, this literacy, and this whole systems kind of connected sense, it changes everything, and we become more discerning, so that less siloed of farmer, rancher versus environmentalist and these kind of things. There's more middle ground and more integration if we take this broader perspective. And I think that's one of the gifts of permaculture to the economy, I think.
Yeah, and another person that we haven't talked about yet is the other co-founder of permaculture is David Holmgren. And I don't want to leave him out of this conversation because he really has also a vision of regenerative economy and the way that he sees it. And I really appreciate this because we know that if you just keep feeding the economy the dominant economy that's happening now, it's either going to explode or implode, but it's not sustainable. And it's already, we've witnessed a number of crashes and to great suffering of a lot of people, but we know that it can't keep going the way that it's going. So we could keep feeding it until it explodes or implodes, or we could pull our money out and see what happens there. But what David was talking about was creating, and I think this is happening now, is parallel economies. Mm-hmm. So that once we can start gradually moving our money out of an unsustainable economy into and supporting more, sustainable or regenerative businesses or local businesses or businesses that have the ethics that we believe in, and start diversifying. It's based on the same diversity principle in an ecosystem, as opposed to monoculture where somebody's planting only one crop, or you see a forest where they just go and plant, lodgepole pines everywhere. It's a setup for fire, which is happening. We're seeing them all over the West now. And because there's this lack of diversity in the forest or on the land, you can apply the same thing to businesses and to where we're putting our money. And now there's the whole cryptocurrency systems that are coming in pretty strong. And this may be the future of money, is having these multiple currencies. Mm-hmm. And that would fit a permaculture principle around redundancy and diversity. Just like if you have skills that are multiple skills in your life. So if one business, for some reason, the bottom falls out from underneath it, you've got something else to fall back on in your life to make money,
Yeah.
It's a pretty basic principle, but the point of it, the goal of it is for stability and resiliency. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking for here.
Yeah.
And the one that's happening now is so top heavy, it's very brittle. Very brittle.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I think it was when David Holmgren visited North America and you hosted him at Commonwealth, the property that you were stewarding for the Regenerative Design Institute. Mm-hmm. I remember him saying something like, monocultures, there's nothing more competitive than a monoculture. Everything needs the same resources, everything's at the same kind of standing, and there's a fight where a diversity or a polyculture enables all of this connections and access to different resources, and then transactional interactions, which create that resiliency. And the business as usual economy, we see kind of discounts resiliency down to zero. It's worth nothing in the standard economy, and so it is quite brittle. So we can inform our thinking about the economy and the design of it by learning from nature. How does nature develop and grow ecosystems?
Yeah, exactly. And understanding deeply the benefits of an ecosystem, where it used to be taught in like environmental science how competitive a forest was, competing for sunlight and competing for water and competing for space and all this, until they started understanding more deeply that there's actually more cooperation going on in an ecosystem than there is competition.
And that's our opportunity as a species, really, is to learn how a forest works or how a grassland works, and actually apply that to ourselves. And that's that. It's a funny thing, on this podcast, people will be talking about different types of investment vehicles and different types of enterprise strategies and, vertical integration, or all these different things in terms of their economic strategies. And, on this interview, we talked about, learning from the birds and bird language and actually appreciating how nature works. And it's actually being informed. Learning from nature could inform all of those other strategies such that they can be resilient and functional. And I think that's
it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what you said, because I don't remember this man's name, but he did a lot of kind of promotional, kind of inspirational speaking about entrepreneurialism and how he's made millions of dollars in all his different businesses, was because he actually helps his competition. He'll send them clients. He'll send them resources.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, everybody else was competing with each other. He was actually helping support them, and they in turn would help support him. And he said that was one of the key reasons for his multiple successes. His key strategy was to help his competition.
Yeah.
And stop seeing it as a competition, but seeing people as colleagues and almost partners.
Well, if we are managing our home or setting the laws and rules for managing the home in a way that works for everyone, then we're all partners in this. And I think
exactly
these broad reframings, I think, are very essential and easy, I think, for in the fast pace of the scarcity economy, the business as usual economy. It's easy to overlook the value of these ideas and eco-literacy. But if we ground ourselves there, then we can greet the whole field of economy and enterprise and meeting needs from a different perspective.
Right.
Well, Penny, I'm really acknowledging that the gift of your time and sharing, and I'm really grateful. I'm wondering if there's any other stories or things that we haven't talked about that you think would be fun to share. I also know that you've gone through a life transition from the land you had been stewarding for a while. I don't know. And I also know, gosh, there's so many things. I also know that you've gotten much deeper into your study of some of the ancient traditions of herbalism. And I'm curious to hear about those things.
Yeah.
But I also want to honor your time and see what you might want to share, and maybe other ways that people could. I also know in that spirit that you're going to be doing more teaching at some points, and I'd love it if you could share about what the future holds for you in the way you're thinking about it right now.
Yeah, well, so basically I moved from living in a permaculture education center in Northern California in West Marin County to a private home in the suburbs on Whidbey Island in Washington. And I love it. I have neighbors. I'm out of the bubble. I'm living in a Republican district. And so I'm getting to know people from very different walks of life that I normally might not have access to here. And I find it, I'm excited. So at the moment, I'm sort of in transition. And so the best way to probably reach me is through my email, which is penny@regenerativedesign.org. And that's our website, is regenerativedesign.org. Right now, it's not super active because we're in the process of kind of nesting up here in Washington for the summer, but I love to go where I'm invited. So if people are interested in me teaching anywhere in the world, I'm open, depending on, the circumstances, to exploring ideas of teaching short courses or permaculture trainings or herbal workshops.
And there's so many things. I could just do a testimonial. There's so many things you could teach. You teach building, forestry, rangeland ecology, food, home kitchen gardening, even grief work and indigenous knowledge systems and nature awareness. I mean, there's almost no end to the topics that.
Well, I'm going to be doing an agroforestry online class that I'm working on with the Ecological Landscaping Program with Eric Olson.
Oh, good. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to try to have more of an online presence in the next year too.
Great.
So, but yeah, the herbal class, the other piece I want to just say to weave it back into the economy is that supporting your local herbalists is also very important right now, because the pharmaceutical companies are doing a lot to try to take us away from the sources of our own medicine. And so the local herbalists are people who have the knowledge of how to start caring for our bodies, do a lot of preventative work, which is where herbs are very potent, as well as remedial work. But so I think it's important to support our local herbalist spokespeople to keep this regulation from coming into play. And so now we can buy our herbs. They can't tell you anymore what they're supposed to be used for, but that's where our own ecoliteracy or local herbalists can come into play. So it's an important part of our economy, is my point. I mean, billions of dollars in pharmaceuticals can be avoided if people have knowledge of their local herbs and how to treat their bodies through food and herbs.
It's definitely one of the things at Lift Economy we're going to be thinking about more and more is the healthcare kind of the industrialization of healthcare and the opportunities to intervene there.
Yeah, and the person who took over our garden in Belize, the Commonwealth Garden, is our local physician, Dr. Anna O'Malley, and she's got a naturainstitute.org where she is working on that very thing. And she's helping people. She's teaching classes, and we're doing an herbal class together, a series in 2019 on personal health care. And she kind of teaches them how the body works, the physiology, and I teach how the plants interact with that.
Wonderful.
And and her point is she tries to educate people so we can learn how to take care of this vessel that's carrying us around. Because like I said, if you're not feeling good or healthy, it's really not fun. It's when something's wrong with your body, and anybody who's had chronic anything knows this, that it's really important. And it's tied into the economy as well.
Yeah, that's a really core component of it.
Yeah, I mean, think about eating organic food. For example, one of the people at Commonwealth has been doing a body burden study where they look at toxic chemicals and how it works in your body. And she's saying that there's science now that's proving that eating organic food actually helps you detoxify your body. So there's both, like, you're not putting toxins in, but it's also helping you leach out toxins that aren't currently in your body. And one of the considerations weaving it back into the economy is if you are concerned that organic food might cost a little bit more, well, think about your medical bills later on.
For sure. Yeah.
It's an economic goal to stay healthy so you don't end up spending a ton of money when you get older.
Yeah, and when you add that up on the level of society, it's Not trivial at all. That's a major component.
No.
Well, I look forward to tracking as you're going through this place transition, and looking for continued opportunities to learn from you and continue to be inspired. And for listeners, Penny has given us a great platform to leap off from into more and more eco-literacy with other people who are, some will be students of hers, and friends and allies that she's influenced over the years. So I'm looking forward to going more into eco-literacy and how that informs our thinking about the economy. And Penny, you've given us some incredible insights that I think will be really valuable contributions to all the listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. You're doing such important, great work. So keep it up. Glad to support it.
Will do. Thanks, Penny.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. To listen to all our past episodes or to share your thoughts about the show with us, visit www.lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can also subscribe to this podcast through iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please take a moment to rate us on iTunes. It's really very helpful in allowing these ideas to reach a wider audience. Once again, thanks for listening.